Broadcasting from Silicon Valley, California, this is Conversations with Jennylyn.
Once again, you're watching Conversations with Jennylyn, and today I have another intriguing guest for you. Today we have Brian Bachand, and he lives in Toronto, Canada, although he's a former American, and he is the founder and CEO of Evolution, Evolution, Evolution. And I cannot wait to hear what evolution is all about. So, welcome to the show, Brian.
Well, it is such a joy to be here with you. I wish we were doing this in California because it's snowing here in Toronto. So I am jealous that you're in the beautiful sunshine.
You should be because we are having great weather.
I
And
know.
based on what I've learned from my friends in Toronto, you guys are pure. You're all white.
It is extremely bleak during the winter. It's probably the hardest. So I am American, not former American. I'm still American, born
Okay.
and raised in Boston, moved here from New York City, and now I have the great joy of being a dual citizen. So I'm now Canadian and American. But I'm fortunate. I need to defrost usually during the winter. This year's a little different. Not as many trips, but that's why I look anyway a little pasty.
You do?
Well, I don't know. I know for myself compared to the summertime where it's usually more covered, but by February it's starting to look a little bleak because of the lack of sun. But anyway, that's a minor problem. It's more joyful to connect with you today, and I can feel the warmth already.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I love it when my guest feels comfortable because it means that they'll open up or we'll just have a great conversation.
Perfect.
So tell us about what are we evolving here in this evolution?
Yeah, so probably the best way to understand my company, which is just evolution, is a little bit about my personal evolution and how that was the catalyst to start the company. So we'll go back to when I went to university in Ohio after undergrad. I went back to Boston, my home city, and I went on to graduate school, but it was actually in the context of the seminary. And so I went through the seminary for 5 years, and at the end, I was ordained a Catholic priest. So I was a
You
priest.
were?
I was a priest for 8 years for the Archdiocese of Boston.
Can I tell you
And
something? I
I'm
wanted to
sorry.
become a nun.
I'm sorry. Can you say it again?
I wanted to become a nun.
There you go. You would have been the most fashionable nun out there. So yeah.
So continue. So you
Yeah.
are a priest.
Well, I'm no longer a priest. I'm no longer a priest. And so I was a priest, though, for 8 years. And it was wonderful. It was a real joy. 4 of those years, I served in a parish west of Boston, doing the frontline things that a parish priest does: weddings, funerals, teaching, going to the hospital. And it was a real joy. And then at the end of 4 years, I received a phone call one Thursday night from one of the bishops asking if I could come in the next day for a meeting. And I went in, and there was a new cardinal that had come to Boston, and he had selected me to be his new priest secretary. That would translate into being like chief of staff. And literally overnight, my life changed. It was a very high profile role because I lived with the cardinal, I traveled with him. So when he went to the Vatican, I was at the Vatican. When he was going in to see the Pope, I was there. When I was the master of ceremonies, when there were diplomatic events, when there were parish outings, I was the one that was the one coordinating that and traveling with him. And it was a real honor and a real gift to be able to be of service to him and to be part of that ministry that was a critical time. The church was going through a very difficult time. There had been a lot of the sex abuse scandal. He was brought in to bring healing, and it was a real honor to be part of that ministry of supporting him as he went about the healing process.
Wow. That's all I can say. I'm very impressed.
Well,
So,
thank you.
okay, before we get to how come you left, It's been a real, I don't want to say challenge, but a real scar sort of against the Catholic Church,
Mhm.
the entire denomination, because there's so many sex abuse scandals. And I mean, so you can't have that many crazy people lying and making stuff up.
Mhm.
In fact, I interviewed in the early part of my career in doing
Yeah.
shows someone who was abused when he was 9 years old, not just him, but his brother also. And they
Mhm.
were forced to watch what was being done to each other. And
Mhm.
so this really messed their lives up. And he's an adult now. And he shared how challenging that was for him. And then later he found out where the priest lived and went and really beat him up and almost killed him. So it's a really sad story. Doesn't matter how you turn it. While you were there, what did you think would have eliminated that problem? Because it seems to be a common thread in the Catholic organization.
So one of the things that I've shared before too, when I was in the parish, there's the famous movie Spotlight that won the Academy Awards and everything, and I was living through that. I was a newly ordained priest and fairly new, first couple of years, and I was learning about everything the same time that the faithful and the public were learning. So every day in the newspaper and on the news, as stories were revealed, I was also learning. And it was challenging because I was trying to process it as a human being, as an
Right.
individual. And then at the same time, trying to be of support to parishioners. And there was a lot of anger. I mean, everyone was angered over what was happening or what didn't happen and trying to process that. So it was challenging. It was very, very challenging. And I think, one of the things that I had to do was to also address that. But, here I am. I've given my life now to a church. What does this mean? What's going on? And it wasn't just the sexual abuse, which is horrific and wrong, and understanding why there's so much anger. It was also the accountability that the church did not take,
Mhm.
i.e., specifically leaders and those in authority.
Exactly.
That is the greatest issue.
Mhm.
And that is also across other organizations that we hear now as well, other denominations, other organizations, schools, etc. But that was also some of the bigger issues. And that's really what I was struggling with. So for myself, it was a real gift to be part of the healing when the new cardinal was brought in because he was a healer, Sean O'Malley, Cardinal Sean O'Malley, and that was his background. And to be part of that, to see the healing, to see how he met with victims every day, that was a gift. And it doesn't take away that there's still a lot more work to do, but to see that there could be some healing and restitution.
There's some who believe that a lot of pedophiles and a lot of people who are confused with which gender they really are, which one resonates with them. Because, some of us can be born one way, but we
Mhm.
have the inclination to be the other way. And I'm someone who does not judge. I feel everyone should be who they really are, and they live a much happier, more productive life that way. And it's not my place to judge anyone else's journey. But do you believe that this to be true? Because there are a large percentage of people who believe pedophiles and confused people join the church as priests because that provides a place for them to hide who they really are. And a lot of these people become perpetrators. Do you agree? Do you think that is true? I mean, it's just something I hear and I'm throwing it out there to see your feelings on it.
Yeah, so I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, so I can't say in a blank slate why certain people went there. But I would certainly say for any individuals who enter into a relationship, whether it can be in a marriage or as a clergy or in any form,
Mhm.
that if there are not things resolved internally, that will act out at some point later.
It's true.
And I think that's really the bigger issue. And I think, for some there, when you look at some of the cases and things that took place, there was a sense there that many of them probably had, they entered when they were in the 1950s, 60s, that was a very high percentage, when, sexuality and different issues were never spoken about. And there's probably some stunted growth there. But we also see that in family structures as well, and the abuse that's happened and why some of those things. So I think it's something that it's all about relationships, and it's also about dealing with the trauma that's within.
I agree. Great answer. I love
Well, it's
the
the
answer.
truth.
Very
It's
diplomatic,
true.
but I love it.
Yeah, but it's the truth.
All right.
But it's the truth.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's the truth. And I think, it can be for anything. You hear about marriages too, when like people go through a divorce saying, I went in with the expectation the marriage was forever, but I realized later, I never worked. I always had a sense of freedom that was stifled down and I was held back. And so, those are things that come out. So I think it's always ongoing. It's an evolution, to use a word I like.
It's true, but you hear the saying, I've heard it many times, and I really believe it. I think hurting people hurt people, and that's just the way it is. If it's unresolved, it comes out somehow.
Right.
Okay, so now I'm going to ask you the big question. How did you end up leaving, or why?
So I'll be quite honest with you. When I entered, to go into the seminary and the priesthood, I always thought it was forever too. And I was very happy. And when I say this in a sense of humility, I was very good. Like I know I made an impact on individuals' lives. I
Wonderful.
and I embraced that, and I valued that. When I started working for the cardinal, there were a couple shifts that happened for me kind of internally. One was I was no longer doing the frontline aspects of a priest, baptisms, weddings, funerals, etc. And I was more in a supporting role at a very high level, and I enjoyed it. And I really enjoyed some of that kind of, you might say, a kind of executive role, and really seeing that I can make an impact there. But I wasn't missing the parish life anymore. So that was a big signal to me. There was also a sense of embracing within myself that I knew I could bring those gifts out to the world, and I could also wanted to love another person and be fully free. I mean, as I said, I was ordained a priest very young, and then as you kind of go through that process, you evolve. And I think your heart also evolves to realize, I want to be able to love someone else. More importantly, I wanted to also love myself authentically as well, and being true to who I was. As I always say, when you stand in your truth and you embrace what's in your heart, then you are free to do what you need to do. And that's what I did. But I didn't just jump all of a sudden. And it's not like just one day you wake and be like, I don't think I want to be a priest anymore. No, I mean, it was something that started to stir within. And I actually took very positive steps that I actually went to go work with someone for close to a year, a wonderful psychologist and therapist, to really test why was I really thinking of leaving. And that was a gift.
You
I'm
did
sorry?
this? You did this while you were still in the ministry.
I did, yes. Yeah, well, I was working full
Okay.
time. Yeah.
Okay.
And I remember that I told the cardinal that I, was reaching this decision where I wanted to be, and I kind of shared I'd also been working with someone. He said, I had no idea. And he said, and you still gave me 150%. And, for that, I'm forever grateful. And I did. I used to work my appointments around, when we were going to the Vatican or trips or different things. And it really was powerful.
And so they were willing to, they don't give you any trouble if you decide you want to leave and like live a normal life. And I'm not saying that life is abnormal, but you're deprived of love, like you say, and a family. So if that's what you want. I think most of us, when we are as young as you were, when you made that decision, we don't know the top from the bottom. I remember at that age, I wanted to be so many things. I've done most of them, by the way.
Great.
But
Except being a nun, except being the nun. You get to be part of that. Not yet, anyway. You never know. You
by
never
the
know.
time I called, they said I was too old. I'd gone past the age where, it was that I qualified to be one. But I'm glad I didn't become a nun. I think I would have broken all the rules and I would have been the nun that they would have excommunicated. But anyway, I have to, so you got out of there after 8 years. So you spent a total of 8 years. That was a long time.
It was, and plus 5 years on the seminary. So 5 years of seminary, 4 years of undergrad, and then, got my BA, then the seminary, 5 years, and then 8 years. And it was wonderful and it was great and it was the right decision. And people have always asked me, oh, it must have been so difficult to make the decision and different things. It really wasn't as difficult to make the decision. I mean, there were issues you struggle with about, like expectations, family, what are people going to think? How does this impact life? And one of the negative aspects I have found from the institutional aspect of the church is it can hold people back in the sense of thinking, what am I going to do? How do you translate what you've done and bring that out to the world? However, I'm fully believe that if you're being led in love, if you're being led in truth, you will always be given what you need to go forward, 100%. And so I knew I could translate those things, and I did. And I was very successful, and all I knew is that I wanted to move to New York City, and that's what I did.
So you moved from Boston to New York.
I moved from Boston to New York City, and I just knew Manhattan is where I wanted to be. That's where I wanted to work. That's where I wanted my life. That's where I wanted everything. I knew one person moving there, and that was it. And I was also determined to find a role, and I did. I was hired at the American Cancer Society in Manhattan. I first worked in Westchester for 1 year, for less than a year, and then back to the Manhattan office. I was hired as a director, and then I got promoted, and on their revenue side, on their corporate side. And then from there, I was promoted to become the executive director at NYU Medical. And so I was raising millions for medical research and technology and programs.
What was that like coming out of there? Were you overwhelmed? I mean, you're coming out of the monastery and you're coming into the world as we know it, which is a zoo sometimes, especially depending on where you go and where you're working and all this stuff. Were you overwhelmed? Did you just come out and fit in? Was it uncomfortable? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so three things worked in my favor. So first of all, I was a diocesan priest. So I wasn't a monk. I didn't live in a monastery. I really lived in the world. So,
Okay.
so that made a big difference. That made a big difference. Second, I was very fortunate with my upbringing and who I was. I'd done a lot of travel, had been exposed to quite a bit. So that was very natural. And third, because of the role I had with the cardinal, I worked at a very significant level and saw a lot. So that prepared me, and it was exciting. I'll be quite honest, when I got to New York, it just fit. Like the energy fit with me, the drive fit with me. And it's like that song, like if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. And I knew I had every confidence. I said, I'm going to be fine. I knew I was going to be fine. And it was great. However, some of the transition was, I found, when people would kind of inquire about, oh, where were you before you started here? And you say you were a priest. Some people were like, oh, okay. It was like a career change. They didn't think anything about it. But some people got really fascinated by it. And I found I had to manage that a little bit because I was trying to prove a new world of what I was moving into.
Yeah.
So that took some time to manage and knowing how to manage that well.
Yeah, because some people look at you like, so what are you now, Mr. Goody Two Shoes,
Exactly.
You're a priest. How soon after you got out of there did you actually fall in love? It must
Yeah,
have been
so
that.
I would say, I was really it was really beautiful. I mean, when I was in New York, I certainly, I met someone and that was lovely and then I had some other, dating and really, it was a late bloomer, and it was beautiful and your heart comes alive in a beautiful sense. But I also needed time too. I needed some time. And the reason for the move to Toronto, the catalyst was at that time I had met a Canadian. And so that was the reason for the move to Toronto. And it continued on as an executive here. That relationship did not continue, but it was a gift. And all relationships come as a gift. To learn something about yourself, and hopefully influence the other person in a positive way, but to move forward. And, that really was beautiful. And, it's an evolution. And that's what, my professional aspect was. I did, professional fundraising. I did that in Toronto. Then I became a partner in executive search. And then I was at a moment that I just desired to bring it all together. And that's what led me on the quest to found Evolution Evolution.
So are you married now?
I'm not married. No, I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not
Okay.
married.
Well, you have such a fascinating story. I think I've spoken to many priests. When I first started my show, I
Uh-huh.
wanted my first segment to be with a priest because I start
Oh,
everything in
beautiful.
my life with God.
Beautiful.
And the only priest that was at our parish was not available for the time that I was doing my show. He was on a break. So I started with two nuns. And you know
Great.
what? That was the very first show I ever produced. And it was
Wow.
nominated for an award
Beautiful.
amongst 500 other entries, I think. And I was the first runner up. Even though I didn't win, I was still happy that my first show was nominated for an award because there were two rock and roll nuns who played guitars and sang.
How fun.
And so it was fun. One of them loved Lady Gaga and she talked about it. So it was a fun show. So, at the
Beautiful.
end of the day, we're all humans. We're all here on a different journey. And we need to just your journey is not mine is not yours, but we need to respect the choices that people make for their lives and not have any judgments about it. So now that you have left that life and now you live this life, you're living in the world, as they say. Do you ever have any regrets that you left?
Absolutely not. I never have had any regrets at all. I'll be quite honest with you. I fully embrace and know that that was the path for me at that time in my life. And I am so grateful for the beautiful relationships I had. There are still some parishioners that keep in touch with me. There's one family in particular. They invited me. Their daughter was very young when I was in the parish, and she said, "I always dreamed that you would do my wedding someday." And she got married last year, and she said to me, she was, "I know you won't be doing the wedding, but they invited me to do the reading." And I went to the wedding, I was there, it was beautiful. And those are gifts. Like, those are tremendous gifts. I have no regrets. I can say that my faith, my spirituality has evolved and deepened at a even a broader level from when I was in the church, and I love that. And I have to say too, when I left the church and moved to New York City, which is a big jungle and competitive, I actually felt a sense of the divine even guiding me there. I had great success quickly because I think of my background. I'd be at these business meetings and I would just intuitively have an insight of how to approach this or something that was different. And that really served me well. And I think that was a real gift. And that's why it's been great now to found my company, Evolution Evolution. And I named it twice on purpose because it's important to know why. The first evolution represents our natural evolution as human beings, who we are, how a pandemic affects us, our DNA. But the second evolution is the one that we can choose to own, how we want to evolve personally and professionally. And when we're in alignment with our desire and our heart, no matter what industry we're in, only then by going in, we will have the greatest success to go out. So I work mostly with a lot of professional leaders and organizations to evolve to their highest level and their highest potential.
So I was going to ask you, how does Evolve help people and what type of people do you help? So I'm getting the impression that you're like a coach.
It is. So, the website and everything I have is going through an evolution right now. It's just been a little over a year. So I really have three platforms. The first is I work as a coach mentor for professional leaders. I love working with people that are either in a very new professional role or they're a new CEO or an organization to really help them go deep to know who they are and how they want to impact the culture and the teams, or people looking to make a career transition, or someone that's at a kind of a crossroads. I've lived that and know what that's like. The second platform is I do work with organizations, and that's something that is going to be reflected in the website as well. Part of it is I do a lot of work with boards. So I do work with boards that that are kind of messy, that have a mission, but how do they get fully aligned to bring that forward and inspire with clarity? And also with recruitments as well, having been a partner in recruitment. So I have a new model and product that I help organizations to really do the recruitment in a new way. The old ways of how things have been done, especially pre-pandemic, aren't going to work moving forward. Human consciousness has been elevated. What people desire is going to be very different in how they want to work. And the third area is a lot of public speaking and retreats as well, about leadership and really owning your evolution.
Now that you have left the parish and you live a completely different life, can you still perform weddings and do things like that, or no? Or you're not licensed to do that? Because I know some people can still officiate wedding ceremonies.
Yes. So when you leave the priesthood, I left, and then I actually went through their formalized process of something called to be laicized, which means you're no longer in the clerical state, so to speak. It's just something the church did and something I wanted to do because I was a very public person and wanted to do that. And obviously within the Catholic Church, I'm not able to function in any of those aspects any longer. I probably could go out if I wanted to be certified to do some type of weddings, etc. I just don't have a desire. I don't have a desire to do that. The reason being, I did it. I loved it. It was wonderful. But that was then, and I'm in a different place now of how I want to use those gifts.
Were you raised in a Catholic family?
I was. So I am the youngest of five children, and it was a big surprise. So there's almost 16 years between myself and the oldest. So I have a sister and then twin brothers and then one more and another brother. And, my parents thought they were done, all set. And then very later in life, I was born. And so I was raised almost like an only child, actually, because of the age difference. And my parents were Catholic. I mean, we went to church on Sundays. My mom taught religious education. We didn't say grace at meals. That was the interesting part. We used to say it like Christmas and Easter. That's really the only time we said grace at meals. However, God was spoken about at home in terms of, let's say I had a big test at school I was nervous about. It was a sense of saying a prayer, that you do the best you can for guidance. So it was incorporated. I would certainly say though, like this sense of where I'm at now, if I had to give any advice to young Brian, is when you grow up Catholic and you have a sense of wanting to be of service to someone else, or you have a spirituality, you just think, I have to do it within the Catholic Church. Where I think if I had to give any advice to say, no, but spirituality, the divine and God is bigger than just an institutional church. And you can take that in any form. And there's a lot of different avenues to go down. So I think for myself, my faith, my spirituality has really evolved in a much bigger way and in a much richer way than some of the things I had even when I was younger. But I still embrace a lot of those foundations as well.
Brian, you're not going to believe it. We're almost out of time, but I'm going to do what I do with all of my guests, which is ask you, what haven't I asked you that you feel is important that you leave with anybody watching this segment? Go for it.
What a beautiful question. I would say for anyone who is watching that if there is something in your heart that you have just been pushing down, that is probably what you need to pay attention to the most. And that can be whether it's about a relationship issue, whether it's a professional issue of something that you desire to do next, or you're struggling in your current role and how do I deal with that? Whatever it may be, listen to that desire because when you listen to the desire that's in your heart, that's the truth. And that truth will always bring you forward, even though your fear and ego want to hold you back. Pay attention to it, evolve forward, and you will have a life that is so beautiful and joyful.
That is beautiful. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Perfect
timing.
I know. So Brian, I am really, really grateful that I had this time with you. You're the first priest that's been on my show, even though you're no longer a priest. You were a priest.
That's right.
I'm very happy that you were able to share that experience with us. And before I wrap this show, I want to ask you this for somebody watching this who may be entertaining the thought of becoming a priest. What advice would you have for that person, especially if they are at the tender age you were when you chose to go down that path?
Yeah. So I actually recently had a conversation with someone who's a little bit older than I was going in. And I actually, I said, I was very excited. I said, again, just the same advice I just offered, follow that desire. But at the same point, I just said, follow the desire, but make sure not to be afraid to ask some of the tougher questions to yourself. Meaning, don't be afraid to ask, wow, have I given myself enough time, to live my life? How do I feel about, moving forward in a particular role? Really ask the questions, and every step of the way, take that time, because that's going to be very important. Very, very important. And I just want to say this too, for anyone that wishes to connect, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, very active on that platform. And also my website, which is www.evolutionevolution.com. There's an email as well, brian@evolution.com. And I welcome to hear from anyone.
Well, Brian, I am very happy that we did this.
I am too. What a gift. I hope it was as enjoyable as the 2 rock and roll nuns. So
I got my priest.
There you go.
Better late than never.
That's true. Thank you, sister. No.
Welcome. Listen, you take care of yourself. And I'd like to do another segment in the future with you. I'd like to hear how your evolution is going. And so, I always want to inspire and encourage. And that's why I do this. So thank you again. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you for watching Conversations with Jennylyn. When a conversation is all you need to be inspired. And if Brian has not inspired you, you were asleep before you started. And we will see you next time.
Broadcasting from Silicon Valley, California, this is Conversations with Jennylyn.